Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's event is on achieving deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. And I am Carolyn Ching. I'm the Director of Research on the Food and Forest team at Ceres. So we have a lot to share with you today. And before that, I just want to get into a few logistics. So this session is being recorded, and a link of the recording will be shared with everyone who is registered for the webinar. If you would like to use closed captioning, if that would be helpful for you, you can select that option in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And today, on our agenda, we will begin the webinar with a little bit of background information on Ceres' deforestation work. I will introduce to you our impressive panel of speakers that are joining us today. And they're going to discuss how investors and companies are leveraging technology to robustly implement their no deforestation, no conversion policies. We also have time today for audience questions. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the Q&A box, which is also at the bottom of your screen. And we will be able to field those questions and answer them later. So I need to provide you with this disclaimer. Competition and antitrust law prohibits agreements and concerted practices that have the object or effect of preventing, restricting, or distorting competition. Ceres does not require or seek collective decision-making or action with respect to production operations or other activities. Ceres facilitates the exchange of public information, but participants must not share or exchange non-public, competitively sensitive information, and participants must avoid coordination of strategic behavior that impacts competition. For participants who are investors or asset managers, Ceres does not require or seek collective decision-making with respect to acquiring, holding, disposing, and/or voting of securities. All decisions by investor participants are at their sole discretion and made in their individual capacities. I'm just going to leave this up for a few more seconds so that you can take the time to read it. Okay, we can move on, Rachel. So today we are discussing the topic of deforestation, and it is really important to state something that's very obvious in this topic area, which is that Indigenous people and local communities around the world have played a critical role in stewarding lands and territories for generations. Today, I am joining the webinar from my home in Seattle, Washington, and this is the land of the Duwamish, the Suquamish, and other Coast Salish people. And I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all Native and Indigenous people in the US and globally. And making this acknowledgement is to affirm our commitment to recognize and respect the rights of Indigenous people around the world, including through our work at Ceres. So Ceres, for those of you who don't know us, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization working with the most influential capital market leaders to solve the world's greatest sustainability challenges of climate change, water scarcity and pollution, and nature and biodiversity loss. We work with investors and companies to drive action and to inspire market-based and policy solutions throughout the economy. We take a three-pronged approach to driving the transition to a cleaner, more just, and sustainable economy. We mobilize investors and companies to act urgently to address risk and to take advantage of the business opportunities in a new economy. The investor network in particular comprises institutional investors who are committed to responsible investment practices and policies that help protect the planet while also improving their portfolio value. And the company network, which includes 50 corporations that are committed to sustainable business practices that help stabilize the climate, protect water and natural resources, and promote a just and inclusive economy. We also convene influential companies and equip them with the necessary tools and knowledge to collectively advocate for policy and regulatory solutions at the state and federal levels. We do this through our policy network, which has over 80 members, and it includes some of the most well-known brands in the US. And these companies advocate for climate and clean energy policies and regulations. And in order to support investors and companies, we employ multiple strategies. And specifically for our work on deforestation and land conversion, we support investors and companies in achieving their commitments to end deforestation and conversion that can be associated with commodity production in company supply chains. For example, we support investors with data and insights on no deforestation, no conversion commitments, and on the implementation progress of those commitments. We do this through public reports, benchmarks, company briefs, and peer analysis, and a number of other things. And last year, Ceres supported about 20 investor engagements with asks ranging from addressing deforestation risk in private label brands to achieving independently verified deforestation and conversion-free supply chains by the end of 2025. Excuse me. So as recommended by the Accountability Framework Initiative, also required by the Science-Based Targets Initiative, forest, land, and agriculture targets, and mandated by the European Union's deforestation-free products regulation. It is time to achieve no deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. The goal is to achieve this by 2025, and this deadline is rapidly approaching. Investors have shown that they are particularly interested in information on traceability and monitoring in order to see how companies are moving towards this goal. And robust traceability systems ensure that companies can trace the materials they source back to the production or processing unit of origin, and monitoring systems ensure that they can directly assess for deforestation conversion compliance. So these are the two topics that we want to talk about today. And our guests are going to help us explore these things. They are going to help us explore how investors can engage companies to robustly implement no deforestation, no conversion policies, and also how companies can leverage technology and satellite data to make progress in their supply chain traceability and to mitigate material financial risks. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce our panel of speakers today. We have Greta Fearman, who is the head of stewardship at Cardano. And in her role, Greta leads a team of experts that are responsible for engaging with global investees and stakeholders to drive long-term portfolio value. Her work focuses on promoting the transition to a sustainable economy and specializes in developing engagements on topics such as biodiversity, deforestation, climate transition, and water management. Michel Santos is the Senior Director of Global Sustainability on Grains and Oilseeds at Bunge. Michel has a career of over 30 years working for global companies in agribusiness. In his current role, Michel promotes sustainable agricultural supply chains and manages Bunge's accountability strategy for its overall sustainability platforms, trends, and markets. And he continuously engages directly with stakeholders such as global customers, investors, NGOs, peer industries, or industry peers, and also actively participates in market-led initiatives. And then we have Alan Kroeger, who is the Director of Nature and Climate at Satelligence. And Alan is an expert in forest risk commodity supply chains, strategies to halt deforestation, and international climate and biodiversity policy. At Satelligence, he works across business development, partnership creation, and coalitions to help companies utilize technology in order to reach their net zero and their nature positive goals. So I'd like to welcome all of our speakers to join me on camera. And we will just kick off with a discussion. And there is time at the end of our conversation for audiences to ask questions. So please do enter your question into the Q&A box. All right, great. And Rachel, if you could please do me the favor of taking our slides down, that would be fantastic. So while Rachel does that, to start, I want to kick off, Greta, if you could share more about the investor perspective on engaging companies on supply chain traceability and monitoring.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for the introduction, Carolyn, and hi to Michelle and Alan. Looking forward to chatting with you all today. So at Cardano, as an investment manager, really we're addressing supply chain traceability and monitoring on the topic of deforestation through stewardship. So through our stewardship activities, that's engagement and voting. So meaning we're using our influence as an investor to encourage our portfolio companies to address deforestation risk, and to implement full end-to-end supply chain traceability. So meaning that, end-to-end from throughout their whole value chain down to the farm level, and mapping their supply chains. Because we see, really supply chain mapping and traceability as foundational. That's really the starting point for company accountability, and really the foundation for further progress on the commitments that they're making on achieving deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. So that's kind of the broad expectation. We see deforestation as a systemic risk. We see that it affects a number of sectors that we see as high risk. So, of those high-risk sectors like food and agriculture and consumer goods, we then have expectations about that supply chain monitoring and what needs to happen, and our expectations on that. So that's things like the supply chain mapping, having processes in place and being able to monitor the supply chains, ideally with satellite data, which me and Alan will share more about. And having that oversight with the satellite data to really monitor the whole supply chain, and then to set commitments on that. So yeah, I'll speak a little bit more about we partnered with Satelligence a couple of years ago to get those insights on better insights and visibility on our portfolio companies of what's happening on the ground in those supply chains of our corporates, so that we can use that in our engagements.
No, that's great to hear, Greta. And actually, that's perfect because maybe, Alan, I can turn to you and maybe you can touch on how does the technology, how does technology in general help investors in achieving some of the goals that Greta has outlined?
The technology is a very broad topic, but the overall, what companies are looking at in the technology space is to basically how do they achieve that traceability as fast and as thoroughly as possible. So there's lots of different basically software oriented tools that they're using, but also things as basic as using software to enable faster supplier questionnaires to gather supply chain data to then make those linkages. Where we specialize is then in that geospatial space to then understand if you don't actually have good traceability data, can you still see where is the commodity in question that I want to source and what is the risk associated with it and when it comes to deforestation and other conversion. So it's one of the tools in the toolbox for companies to achieve the DCF goals that Greta and others are looking for them to achieve. So with the geospatial component, that technology is very much unlocking new areas of spatial and temporal resolution that matter for companies to be able to actually make use of it in business level decision making, and in the temporal resolution that matters for businesses to make a decision when it comes to the timeliness of sourcing, which then all rolls up into their their annual reporting. So the flexibility that brings from technology, from geospatial data, then enables both monitoring, reporting, and planning to occur with the same data and across large scales for a company as large as Bunge, for example. So the technology now on the geospatial side with satellite data enables you to see where there are still forests to protect, where there are restoration opportunities, where there are recent historical trends that point to this set of interventions versus another. which commodity is the driver of deforestation, where and when, so that you can determine what is the risk that is actually in a landscape and is it associated with your supply chain or not. And a lot of what underpins the technology in terms of using data visualization from geospatial is what underpins it, which is the mapping of forests of commodities, of making sure you can differentiate between the two, so that a company that's interested in understanding what is the DCF status of cocoa or palm or coffee in these landscapes, that we can actually tell the difference. And so that's been the sort of the main advancement in this space, and then making sure it's consistent and coherent across space and time, so that a company that has a supply chain that spans the tropics can compare their risk for palm in Colombia the same as they compare it to risk in Indonesia.
Thanks, Alan. So Greta, maybe to jump back to you. So this is like a very helpful kind of explanation of what satellite technology can help us support. So can you speak to like the data that you receive from Satelligence? How does that help you with your engagements, and how do you leverage other approaches like technology or otherwise in order to meet the needs of what traceability, in order to understand traceability and monitoring at company level?
Sure. Yeah, so just to pick up, what Alan is saying is Satelligence mainly is offering this data to corporates, right? To understand their own supply chains and have that visibility on their supply chains. A few years ago, we decided as an investor, which is maybe less frequent or unusual, but to actually use the data ourselves for our own portfolio companies to get that visibility. So really kind of similar data to what companies are using to understand their supply chains. We decided, as an investor, to get that as well, to get better insights into the portfolio companies. So we decided to get that data to inform our stewardship and engagement activities. So we use it now as part of a collaborative engagement. We group together with a number of other global investors, and we use this data from Satelligence on palm oil, soy, and cocoa. We have the most granular level data available on palm oil because has the best traceability at this point. And we access the data in an online portal. All of our investor group have access, and there we can see what's actually happening again on the ground in the supply chains of our portfolio companies that we've decided to engage with. For soy and cocoa, because the supply chains are less transparent at this point, we have a more regional level risk view on really where companies are sourcing from that might be the most high risk. But for palm oil, we can get quite granular, and we can really see what are the deforestation incidents happening on the ground, and how do those link to our portfolio companies, how big they are. We have context like if they're happening in protected areas or reserves. So that also gives us context on the biodiversity impact, which does also help us focus our engagements and then really speak to companies, have some very concrete and targeted engagements. How are they monitoring them? How does what we're seeing in their own reporting say on their progress on their targets compared to what we're seeing in terms of real life, deforestation happening, and how does that reconcile? Another thing we can see is deforestation that's happened since past the EUDR cutoff date. So again, we can talk to companies, okay, we know that they have to comply, they're going to need to report soon. We're seeing these incidents, how are they addressing that? And so again, we're really able to have more granular level detailed conversations, targeted questions, using evidence from our data. So it helps us a lot in our stewardship. I think in terms of, other non-satellite data related things, we complement this more with a high level look at why is deforestation happening? Why are things not traceable? Kind of why are the issues? So we do complement that again with, what incentives need to be in place, what kind of policy and regulations. So I think the satellite data gives us really like a what's happening on the ground, what's happening in terms of, how are companies monitoring, how traceable, But again, we need to complement that with a kind of the bigger question on the why and policy. So we also talk to companies about that angle as well on the regulatory front and bring them together.
That is fascinating because I think you're really highlighting how for yourself you're making use of the technology in order to understand what's really happening on the ground. And so actually I now want to switch to Michel to kind of capture the company side here, because investors are really kind of educating themselves, coming up to speed, getting the information to understand, how deforestation is shaping on the ground. So Michel, can you talk about sort of overall, what is Bunge doing to address deforestation? And then I want to dive into like how you're also thinking about and using satellite technology. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, by the way. I think this is a critical discussion, especially in these times, right? So back in 2015, Bunge established a industry-leading commitment, I would say, to end deforestation in our supply chains in 2025. So it's a kind of a time-bound commitment, right? So we've been working to develop proper metrics and understand technology. We've been identifying where deforestation could or not be connected to our commodities. And we were able to narrow down our commodities to soy in South America, mainly, and palm in Southeast Asia, right? So these would be the two commodities that we have to keep the focus on. Definitely, soy is grown in many other areas of the globe that are not connected with deforestation because there are not forests there anymore standing. So that's the reason why we were talking about mainly for South America. So zooming in South America, so the technology has helped us to understand where will be high risk, where agricultural expansion could be happening over forest or other native vegetation that could be in place. So Bunge has commissioned studies considering land use change. And we started with kind of a 2005 onwards, so we could understand exactly what the dynamics would be. We were using publicly available information from sector, from WRI, we were using Global Forest Watch. We were able to narrow the global focus in parts of Cerrado, which is a biome in South America, mainly in Brazil, and also the Chaco for Argentina and Paraguay. And that would be our priorities. And inside of these biomes, we could effectively understand what is happening. We have checked the rest of the world. We continue to check the rest of the world for grains and oilseeds and other commodities, and we have not seen any kind of a deforestation connected to the value chains. So the beauty of that is that, well, since 2020, after 5 years, we were able to be 100% traceable on soy to farm in our direct sourcing in these priority regions. So we are collecting information from these farms that are sourcing us directly in these areas, and also for the farms that are connected to us indirectly, because you can source directly from a farm and also indirectly through a reseller. And we just announced it in 2024 that for these priority regions of Brazil, we were able also to be 100% traceable in the indirect sourcing. So it was something quite amazing for the sector as a whole. We are talking about more than 19,000 farms, and they represent over 27 million hectares of land that we monitor. We not only map, but we monitor all of this land. In these priority regions, this is very, very significant because we can understand what is happening, not only for our direct sources, but also for the largest majority of our indirect sources. We continued engagement for 2025, so this is our last year of implementation of the policy. We can provide numbers which are about, how much we have of deforestation and conversion free. So we are talking about more than 99% of what we are sourcing in the Cerrado region, which is quite pivotal for the discussion in Brazil, is DCF, which is deforestation and conversion free. And specifically in areas of Cerrado where we could have some more higher problems of deforestation, we still have nearly 98% of DCF, right? Considering a statistical figure of 2020 as a reference, right? For palm, which is really important also, we monitor more than 100 million hectares, nearly 120 million hectares of areas that are connected to our palm plantations. We are not talking only about the plantations, we are also monitoring surrounding the mills. So that gives us a very comprehensive picture on the surroundings of the palm plantation, the mills, and the smallholders landscape as well. Our latest number shows that kind of a 97% of our products are traceable to mill, and some 95% are traceable to plantation level for palm. So this is very impressive, considering that in our case, only roughly 3.5% we buy directly from the mill. So we are talking basically the engagement with our indirect suppliers as well. We continue to work beyond these priority areas because deforestation is something that could happen where forests are located and where agricultural expansion could also happen. So we have deployed efforts to trace and monitor our soybean fields originations since 2006, if you consider the Amazon biome. So that's where we had the first pledge to be deforestation-free. Since 2023 in the Cerrado as a whole, so beyond the priority regions of Brazil. And we did also monitoring over time for other areas. Just last year, we monitored over 26 million hectares in the United States as well to check if there was any kind of deforestation, which is completely negligible. And we are doing this to be compliant with EUDR, which is something that our friend Greta just mentioned. So I think that we have a full visibility on where it matters. We are facing the challenge. We are bringing other peers. We are using the best of technology, and we are getting there for our goal in 2025.
Wow. Thank you so much, Michel. That's very interesting to hear about the traceability achieved, not just for direct, but also for indirect, and overall the traceability that you're doing, the mill level, even for palm oil. And I want to kind of tie it in with you, Alan. So you also, Satelligence also does work with companies in order to provide data and monitoring solutions. And Michel sort of talked about some of the different things that they're trying to achieve with both soy and palm oil. Can you kind of elaborate on how you can link monitoring data for a region to a company's suppliers and producers, which is that critical element that Michel was also touching on?
Yeah, no, and a lot of the gain, the benefit there is actually from the hard work that Michel and his team do ahead of this type of engagement. So gathering that data can then basically we receive the geolocation data from either the companies or the company's suppliers, and then we assess. Basically, we have different forest baselines for all the relevant regions. So for where they're sourcing palm or where they're sourcing soy. And then we look at, okay, this is what forest looked like in 2015 for like an NDPE cutoff date, or this is what the forest looked like in 2020 for EUDR. And so then you can look at all the change in relation to those different baselines across those different years. And then by overlaying them with when that change occurred and when a company was engaged with that particular geolocation, be it a plot, a farm, a concession, or general sourcing jurisdiction, we can then say, this is where the change detection occurred. The change happened in the forest baseline. So we know that it's actual natural forest loss, it's deforestation in relation to that asset. And with the linkage data provided by companies we work with and through a network of partners, you can then see that this is deforestation connected to this plot, and this plot is connected to one to many different companies or suppliers. And so you can then see how the deforestation impact in that plot is then cascaded into the rest of the supply chain for whatever commodity in question is there. The same with jurisdictions. So like what Greta mentioned around for cocoa and soy. So in locations where they don't have good traceability data, but they know that some companies like the big brands, they don't know what farms they're sourcing from, but they know that they're buying cocoa from this part of Ghana or this part of Brazil. And so that's where the mapping of cocoa or the mapping of soy comes into play to then see where did that cocoa, where did that soy replace forest and when. And so then you can see per municipality in Brazil or per municipality or district in Ghana, here's where cocoa has replaced forest more in this location versus this location, so that it helps them understand, here's where my procurement strategy can be informed by this level of risk in this location versus another. And that's sort of the give and take at the moment as companies are chasing down more traceability data.
And Alan, if we go a little bit deeper on this, can you talk about your work with Bunge to show how your partnership with companies can prompt sort of on the ground changes that lead to producing more DCF products? And then
Yeah,
actually,
I
can
won't.
you, sorry, Greta also touched on this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about like the utility of real-time data for company performance as well?
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess the second part first with so how the real-time data piece right now goes into the whole sort of the monitoring, reporting, planning component of companies are starting to realize that with geospatial comes real-time data, which then can inform real-time decisions. So when in the nature of week to week with different shipments in relation to both needing to meet DCF targets for the end of 2025, but also needing to meet their science-based targets on needing to meet different procurement commitments they have from customers for low carbon products, then they can look at in real time where is deforestation happening, how is it influencing a live emission factor of the land use change associated with this mill or associated with this area that I'm sourcing cocoa from. And at the same time, by seeing real-time deforestation or other conversion happening, then it's not about waiting until the end of the year when you assess your impact to then engage with that supplier. You can instead engage with that supplier that week by sending them the information saying, what's happening here, this needs to be halted for both compliance reasons and for impact reasons. So that alone is just one example, and there's tons more that come out of the sort of new asset creation that's happening in this space with that data. I won't speak for Bunge, but in terms of what we're seeing in terms of tangible results with this data and with DCF efforts right now, is that you have companies that are again realizing that data for DCF on now new layers for grasslands, new layers for wetlands, and then increasingly accurate maps of forests, that they can not just combat the deforestation component in their supply chain and part of their company goals, but it's then about combating these twin crises of biodiversity and climate at the same time. So we're seeing companies make dramatic procurement strategy shifts using our data due to both DCF and due to SBTs or general net zero targets. And they're using it to understand this is the country or this is a region where I have forests still standing. And so it's actually a place where I should invest in these types of interventions and not just see it as high risk, but without understanding what type of risk there is in that landscape. So a landscape can be high deforestation risk, but it's because there's been lots of historical deforestation, but there's very little forest left, or it can be high deforestation risk because there's still lots of forest left to protect. And so companies are now taking a much more nuanced look at those dynamics to inform their interventions with their suppliers to do that, which then brings both the ecosystem biodiversity and climate benefits in a much more dramatic and much more temporally sensitive and important timeline.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, Michel, I kind of want to ask you, I'm also curious about your thoughts on real-time data for monitoring in your supply chain, but also wanted to see if there's anything you can add with respect to how information or data from Satelligence can really support the work that you're doing, and particularly with palm oil.
Yeah, so we work with different partners and they bring us different solutions depending on the region, depending on the crop, right? So I would say that the information is always very important. If you think about real time, this is more connected to what to be a perennial crop, right? Especially for palm, you have, you are harvesting all year long. So these kind of timing in terms of monitoring is really important because you may be connected to something that is happening now. You may be connected to something that will happen in the near future because the harvest is continuous around these areas, right? If you go and narrow to annual crops like soy, the real-time data, is not that relevant. But I can explain a little bit better why. So when we talk about palm, we go to the palm level monitoring that we have, which will be, the plantation or surrounding a given mill, right? We receive alerts every 2 weeks. So we can overlap, these alerts with our monitoring and understand what is happening and then engage. Because as I've told you, most likely it's indirect sourcing for palm. So it's really important to have these in an early stage so we can engage properly. This really helps with the engagement, not only with the direct, but mainly with the indirect suppliers, right? And then we can claim that we are verified deforestation-free. And how do we do that for palm? Well, the volumes that we have, they have been mapped and they have been monitored. And we do use third-party data coming from these partners to verify the non-deforestation claims that we have, right? Also, as a sector, we have aligned a deforestation-free volume under the NDPE, as Alan was saying. So there is a methodology that is shared, and we want to be certain that all the palm volumes will be deforestation-free going forward. So the real-time data really helps us with this kind of analysis. The supply is contiguous, right? So you have to have this information and engage properly. And engagement has to happen really early in this stage. For soy, we monitor each of these traceable farms, and we check the land use change connected to soy production for the last year. So it's important that once soy has been planted, I know what happened there in the recent past, right? So we have this monitoring year over year. We have to adjust the satellite imagery because in these areas, we're not talking necessarily about forest, but we may be talking about, native vegetation conversion. So it's a different threshold. So it's a different analysis, and we have to adapt to make certain that we deliver. So technology is really, really important. There is an initiative, which is the 1.5 Celsius, soil roadmap, and we are part of it. So the good thing is that we have aligned definitions with the industry. Now all companies can monitor and consider the same technical protocol, because this misalignment could be complicated if you say, I am DCF or I am not DCF. For the indirect sourcing farms that maybe we do not have full traceability, we have to monitor the surrounding of the elevators. So if the indirect sourcing farms are not known, so we cannot trace back to these boundaries of the farms, we will have to consider a radius surrounding these elevators to make certain that the landscape is deforestation-free. Because if it's not, we will have to allocate deforestation to these unknown sources, right? So the better the traceability that we have, the better the actual results that we're going to have. The real-time monitoring for this kind of an annual crop is important to provide us flags so we can engage earlier. We can do things before, there is further problem in this area. But also, it brings a lot of false positives, right? Because especially if it's a landscape approach monitoring, you do not know if it's a soy farm. Maybe it's a different kind of deforestation or land conversion happening in there. So these false positives, they demand a lot of energy. So it's always better to have the proper traceability and be able to monitor these farms. And all of these things, they are verified. So when I talk about the DCF for soy that I just mentioned before, or when I talk about the DCF for palm, these figures are verified by third parties. So there is auditing into this. And we also have the Soft Commodities Forum where we have this alignment, and all the companies can present their reports, and all the information there is audited by a third party. So that gives extra confidence on the protocols that we are using, how we are using technology, and how we can engage properly.
Thanks, Michel. I think you just really highlight the complexity of traceability and all of the different elements that go into it. There's obviously, like, as you all have already pointed out, but just to summarize, there's the spatial element, but there's also this time-related element. And then there's also the linkage to the commodity that you're actually sourcing and a lot of some of these different things. So then, and you've kind of unpacked a lot of that already today, but Greta, turning to you, because of all of this complexity, how have your engagements with companies contributed to kind of more advanced supply chain traceability or kind of advancing some of this conversation in how companies are doing this?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to attribute our engagement very directly to advancements, of course, right? There's a lot of things happening simultaneously, but I think in terms of what we've observed and what we think, we're encouraging from companies, I think again, by us asking targeted questions about incidents, ensuring that these are accurate, I think really encourages companies to do that good traceability and keep it up, right? I think the thing is also that the supply chains are complex, but they're also so dynamic. And investors like us having insights and connecting incidents to our portfolio companies and diving into that, I think, encourages companies to stay on top of their mapping and that traceability and go down to the farm level so that these data services are accurate and the insights that we're getting as investors stay accurate. And like Michel said, this false positive conundrum. So that's not happening, right? But like better traceability, we can get more accurate insights. So I do think our engagements do, encourage that. We also encourage a high level of disclosure on these linkages down to the mill level, specifically for palm oil, and encourage companies to dive into their supply chains on soy and beef as well, since these are, more opaque at this point, and start doing the work there. I think on a positive note, what we've seen over the few years of doing these engagements is more companies working with satellite monitoring services. It is something we have been encouraging, and we're seeing a lot of this advancing. I think, Alan, if you said how much Satelligence client base has grown since we've been partnering with you over the last few years is probably significant, because we hear a lot. I mean, just last week, a consumer brand company telling us they're starting to work with Satelligence on cocoa now. And another one rolling out something similar to Satelligence data across all their commodities. So we're definitely seeing an uptake in satellite-based monitoring, which I think is quite promising in the last few years.
Thanks, Greta. And Michel, what about from the company perspective? How have dialogues with investors contributed to how you might be doing supply chain traceability or any improvements on the company end?
Yeah, this is good, and it's great to have Greta here because in this kind of interaction we get this kind of feedback, and we learn at every moment. I would say that the first thing is to keep always the discussion on a basis that everyone could understand. Right. So I know that these topics are technical, but we have to avoid technicalities. I would say that investors are not interested in the detail of the detail. They want to be able to understand what is happening. So that's about the impact on the investments, right? So we try to avoid the technicalities, but we do have a lot of technical protocols that we can share and discuss with technicians and NGOs and others, but we have to have a very plain language. This is something that we've learned. And that's also what I would recommend other companies to do. So that's the reason why, to have protocols that are the same throughout the industry is so important. So one could compare performance in terms of what really matters, right? And understand the journey of a company. We are somehow front runners in this analysis and on traceability metrics. So I would say that over time we have improved and we have disclosed much more information than other companies have. And this is also because of the engagement with these investors, but also understanding the moment of the industry. The good thing is that now major companies, our major peers, they can talk the same language as we are talking because we have aligned protocols. We are engaging with them over the last few years. So hopefully investors are going to have a better sense about how they can contribute and how companies could perform differently. I would say that investors also play a very important role into all of these analysis because they are not engaging only with us. They are also engaging with different layers of this value chain, right? So we've been certifying, for instance, a higher volume of products than we sell as certified. We usually ask investors, how are they engaging downstream players, right? We always ask them how this engagement is like, because if the downstream players were buying more certified volumes, deforestation-free volume certified from companies like ourselves, it would be better for everybody. And that would also help us to provide the right incentives to the growers, right? So I think that this is something that we continuously ask engagement from the investors for them to take the same language. I do understand, asking for more information. We have provided many, many indicators. We have provided, so much of information that we were not able before, because we have enhanced traceability. And once it's traceable, you know exactly what is happening in this farm level. But this information has to create value in the value chain, right? So information should be something that we could provide better to our customers. If engagement from investors could also happen with them, so we will never have, this excess of certified volumes for palm or for soy that simply do not find a market because people not necessarily are seeing the value of buying deforestation-free products. So this is where we would say that the journey is so important, the engagement of all the actors, and every actor has a role here.
I really appreciate you touching on that. I do think that it is important for all actors in the value chain to be rowing in the same direction. So things like speaking the same, using the same terms, looking and tracing, monitoring for the same elements, and then the opportunity that investors like Greta at Cardano can bring is engaging all the companies at different levels of the value chain on all of these different things. And I think stitching all of that together is really fabulous. Thank you, Michel. So I do have a question for all of you before I turn it over to our Q&A from our audience. So what are some of the key successes you've seen in improving corporate progress on supply chain traceability? And what factors do you think are contributing to those successes? Or in addition, or alternatively, if you want to touch on what challenges are remaining, I'd be interested in that too. And so maybe Alan, I'll start with you, and then we can go to Greta and then Michel.
Sure. I think what I alluded to earlier, but is the uptake. One of the successes is the uptake of monitoring that we're seeing into other parts of the business. So it's traditionally been, the early adopters of this are in sustainability or impact, ESG reporting, but they don't have much of a say in what happens in procurement when the actual impact is occurring before it's then read out in an annual review. So the movement of this into procurement and operational sort of risk management has been a large success because it makes it more real for the company. And yeah, I put this down to really just people looking for turning sustainability from a cost center into a profit center. And so if they can use this data for additional value creation in procurement, then we're seeing a lot of benefits there. And the use of geospatial data, not again for just reporting, but for looking at risk, but also resilience in supply chains. And I think the main challenge that remains right now, just due to all the UDR conversations, is getting the companies that are new to this space to leapfrog that normal process that companies go through in maturing in this space, but getting them to immediately think beyond compliance so that they can look at how geospatial data can help them understand like where to catch commodity expansion before it gets out of hand in new locations where forests are still remaining. So getting them to think at a landscape scale in an early stage.
Greta, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, those are good points. I think too, we have heard from companies start to operationalizing this a little bit more. Like you said, Alan, like becoming less siloed and having, this information be part of actual buying decisions and cost assessed based on, financial cost and becoming a business decision, which I think is really nice to see this integration throughout the business. I think one other area that we've heard success and seen success from a number of portfolio companies saying this is the advancement in palm oil compared to where things were a few years. It's gotten much more traceable, I think, in combination with more supporting regulatory framework. There's a lot of companies investing in landscape initiatives there. So I think kind of the combination of all those positive elements coming together, so the better mapping, the use of satellite data, and the supportive environment, I think, have helped make that supply chain less problematic. So hope to see kind of what has happened there also improve within the soy supply chains. I know there's challenges left there, especially with conversion now next to deforestation, and the farmers needing to understand, what that means, and the traceability that needs to happen in the soy supply chain. So it'd be nice to kind of take those learnings from palm oil and see the same thing happen next with soy.
How about you, Michel? Do you want to close with any successes or challenges?
Yeah, sure. And this is a very good discussion. I would say that, as we said, we started back in 2015. So we do have a timeline, that we are delivering on this. So over the years, we have provided more information on our performance, and this is just great. I think that over the years, we've learned what are the indicators that could be more material to show our progress, right? So this interaction with not only investors, but also stakeholders from different parts of our value chain, this is so important. I think that we've considered all relevant protocols for the time being, from GRI to CDP. We are engaging with TNFD since 2022, supporting the development of the framework. And by the way, we are early adopters, and we have already disclosed the LEAP approach in our latest report. So in terms of protocols, in terms of disclosing information, I think that we are in a good moment. And this is only possible because of the higher traceability, which is the focus here, right? So we've been able to understand better the causes of deforestation and create solutions that would support the development of areas in our value chain in the most customizable way, because challenges are different. What is the driver for deforestation or conversion in a given area may not be in some other areas. We are providing financial incentives to stop this deforestation, right? We can engage technically in terms of technical assistance to these farmers to help them to expand over areas that are already open. Integration of pasture and soybean, for instance, is another thing that we do support. So over time, we have learned how to develop the right engagement things to create value for the farmers. And we are coming out to regenerative agriculture, which is a very positive approach that it would be great to talk a little bit more later. I would say that the challenge remains the same, which is the demand piece, right? The engagement by downstream players, supporting farmers with premiums, because it's a very good way to monetize how this value is to be deforestation free, to engage with our programs and other differentials, connecting, due to the traceability, connecting farmers with specific players, and we can provide such information. It's important always to think that we are asking farmers in all these areas, let's say South America, we are asking farmers to waive their right to expand, right? Expand legally. We are not talking about illegal deforestation. We are talking about expand legally over areas that they own. So how they are going to make money out of their farms. This is a tremendous ask. And that's the reason why, the incentives are so important. These farmers, they would need some compensation from the market. It's not a company like Bunge or our peers that individually will solve this. I think we've been able to crack this nut for the most, material areas. We are working with the Farmers First Cluster, supporting restoration, paying for forest standing, but there are multiple things that, the value chain could help us. And this remains a challenge today, because in the end of the day, deforestation-free product has not achieved the value in the market that it should achieve. So we have to take this away from the corporate speech and go to action, interact, and provide the right incentives for these farmers.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a good thesis, and I actually do want to come back to you on that. We actually have a number of questions from our audience. So maybe I want to start, Greta, a question for you. How does Cardano use information from environmental NGOs about deforestation in your engagements?
So we look at some sources of NGOs to compare what they are finding in terms of deforestation, the reports that they publish, but I would say Satelligence is the main source. So sometimes we'll check, I think it's biannual reports, global witness reports, different regions that NGOs publish, this is what's happening in Brazil. These are the main incidents, and they're tied to companies like all the big soy producers, Bunge, ADM, all of them, and where and how those are aggregated. Typically, I think the NGO reports are looking at big human rights risks in these incidents, how those are tied to maybe land grabs or deforestation risks. So they do add that angle. And that will help us maybe pick out some of the Satelligence deforestation cases and kind of map them together, and again, give us another contextual layer to focus, or help us focus on a specific region that an NGO might be focusing on. So yeah, I would say, again, Satelligence is the main source because Satelligence is aggregating all the data per company, per portfolio company that we're looking at. And then the NGO reporting might kind of complement it on a specific theme or a specific region, or to be supplementary in terms of supporting the information we get from Satelligence or see from a company.
Thank you. That's helpful. Oh yeah,
just to say that we also pull from, like, whenever reports come out from NGOs that are naming locations, deforestation events, and companies, then we always pull from that data too, to then check the validity of mainly the deforestation events, but then also see what type of linkages that they're making, if they make sense in our system or not too.
And I think maybe one other point on that, because I just remembered a case recently with the new Satelligence portal that we have. We can filter on the incidents that are happening in protected areas. So we can complement that with the NGO reporting for more details. What is this protected area? What are maybe the indigenous groups that are in a specific area to make this kind of incident more impactful, negatively impactful. So I think that those biodiversity layers that Satelligence offers really does work well with really more deeper NGO reporting on what's happening maybe in certain parts of Malaysia or Indonesia, and kind of the broader context about the communities in those areas, and really the nuances of some of these incidents that I think Michel and Alan both spoke about, that when you kind of really start digging, you can see, again, the nuances of who owns the land, what's happening, and the NGO reporting can give really good insights on that.
That's great to hear. Yeah. It's definitely a whole community in helping to address this topic between NGOs, technology, investors, and of course the company action, specifically supporting farmers on the ground as well. There's obviously many more questions, but we are absolutely at time, and I can not let us go over. So I apologize for not being able to get to all of them. But Greta, Alan, Michel, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for all of the insights that you shared. I think we really kind of not just unpacked a little bit of the complexity and talked about it, but also shared how there are solutions that exist for us to really tackle some of these issues. So Rachel, if you could help me out by putting our slides back up. So to all of our audience today, thank you for taking part in our event, and special thank you again to Greta, Alan, and Michel. You will be receiving a follow-up email with a recording of this session. And if you have colleagues that missed the event, please feel free to share that link with them. You can learn more about Ceres' deforestation work and our nature work streams at the links that we are going to drop in the chat for you. And before we close, I also want to note a few important upcoming things. We invite you to join us for an evening at Ceres, which is at the JFK Presidential Library in Boston on October 6th. This is our annual fundraiser, and this year it's dedicated to celebrating Boston and the Bay State's role in emerging climate technology and clean energy. I'd also like to invite you to join Ceres' Freedom to Invest initiative. It brings together investors, companies, and other stakeholders to champion the freedom to consider all material financial risks in their decision-making. And also, please visit ceres.org, and you can learn more about all of our latest sustainability research, as well as all of our upcoming events. And to stay up to date on Ceres' latest news, reports, and other events, please consider subscribing to our newsletter. And then finally, please take a moment to take our survey so that we can continue to host thoughtful and engaging webinars like this one. There is a slide with a QR code, but also we will drop a link in the chat where you can fill out our evaluation. So thank you all. Thank you, Michel, Alan, Greta. Thank you to our audience. I appreciate you all joining us today. Have a really great day.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.